folks at home.
Please welcome to the stage, Kadir, program manager on, or yeah, product manager, apologies, on web platform.
Oh, there you go. No, thank you, Tab. And Kausua, was really fantastic. Fantastic seeing where things are going in that space. So hi, everyone. I'm Kadir. I'm a product manager on the web platform at Google. And I started as a web developer when I was 15 in the 90s, back in the days of Netscape and table layouts. This is what my site aspired to look like, really. It was the 90s. And later then, I joined Mozilla for a long time, over a decade. And I worked on all kinds of stuff. But for the last few years there, I was on MDN. I was a product lead on MDN. And one thing that we did there was those interactive examples at the top of the pages. But what I also noticed while I was there is that MDN was at the end of a process, like a tail end of a process that we didn't really understand very well. So product development is a constant ebb and flow of discovery and delivery. And first you figure out what you want to build, then you build it, you iterate on it, and then you get it out to users. And of course, that also applies to the web platform. So this is a simplified, very simplified view of it, of course. But the web platform is also an outlier in many ways. So for one, and unlike almost any other platform, it's not developed by a single vendor, not off of a single spec. So even answering a seemingly very simple question is surprisingly complicated. Like if you ask the question, what is the web platform? I mean, it's pretty straightforward, but there is no straightforward answer. Is it like a collection of specs that are worked out in various working groups, maybe just some of them? Is it what's shipped in a browser, or all of them, or a subset of them? And what about inconsistencies in implementation? What if there are inconsistencies, which one is the web? Which one is the platform? So it's surprisingly difficult to answer those questions. And that seemingly simple question is an indicator that the way we develop the web platform has some pretty glaring issues at every stage of the process. So there is no systematic discovery. There is no coherent delivery. And there is no coordinated go-to-market for platform features. A little bit more detail. There is no systematic discovery. The web has no user researchers. Like browser vendors obviously do. But even then, only a fraction of the user research time that is spent on the browser is spent on the platform. Very tiny fraction. And then a lot of that research is kept internal, which is somewhat self-defeating because a lot of those things can only be actually addressed in an interoperable manner. And then we have no coherent delivery. So the delivery of web platform features is really a beautiful mess of working groups, committees, prototypes, and standards. And that's in the best case. Sometimes we just ship and have to ship and then figure out the rest later. And even in the best cases, when we go through all of those phases, features appear in browsers at different times. So you might have a feature like Subgrid ship in 1 year in one browser, then 3 years later in another browser, and then a year after that in the last browser. And then we have to guess when that happens. Like, if it's not getting traction after being shipped in the first browser, is that because it doesn't solve a problem, or doesn't solve the problem in the right way? Or is it because it doesn't have interoperability? And then finally, there is no coordinated go-to-market. It's very difficult for web developers to tell what they can target. Of course, browser vendors are also guilty. We usually only talk about the latest stuff that's shipping in our browser, as if that's really relevant to developers, or to a large number of developers. For most of them, it's not. They care about what they can target, and it's not what's just in the latest version of a browser. The other platforms solve for that. They tell you the percentage of the total audience that you can reach with specific versions. So on the left here, you can see Android Studio. If you launch that, that's the first thing that you see. It will tell you that if you want to reach 95% of Android users, you have to target version 7 of it. And on the right-hand side, you can see the same from Apple for iOS. If you target iOS, and this is from May still, but if you want to target iOS 16 and 15, you get roughly 95% of the users there. But on the web, you're on your own. there is no versioning for the web. I mean, not really. And there's certainly no information about what percentage of your audience you can reach with that. So if you were thinking, of course there is, I can go to can I use, and there is a percentage in the upper right corner, and that will tell me what the reach of a browser is, or of a feature is. Well, did you notice that it assumes that all Chrome for Android users are on the latest version of Chrome for Android? I mean, unfortunately, it's not. It would be really great, but it's not. And before you reach out to Alexis about this, this is really the best data that's out there. Best data for reach of a feature. And that's pretty horrifying, actually. So the data in the upper right corner, you can't use that to target actual users. Another fun fact about that, it can never reach 100%. It's not possible for any feature, not even for those that are 15 years old. Maximum you can get is 97%. So what do developers do then? Here's what they do. So I'll let you read it for a moment. It's honestly a miracle that anything works at all. And that web developers manage to build anything at all, but they do. They do manage to build really fantastic things, even when we insist for a decade that you have to build your site layout using tools built for text, like floats. But there are obviously issues with the way we develop the web platform. So for years, we've asked developers about their top developer pain points. And what we used to hear was, number one, keeping up with changes to web standards and the web platform. And number two, making a design or an experience work across browsers the same way. And these were pretty much number one and number two consistently for years on end. And then recently, we've dug a little bit deeper into that. And we've broken down the first one to better understand it, into keeping up with changes to existing APIs and to best practices and to new features. And now those things make up number one, number three, and number four. And making a design and experience work the same across browsers is still right up there. So we've been hearing about this from developers for a really long time, and it deserves a response. So there are two related issues here. One is based on the messaging, and one is based on the realities of the platform itself. Number one is features are often unavailable across browsers or available with bugs and inconsistencies, and therefore they're deemed unusable in production. And that reduces the impact that we have with our work. So we put all the work in to ship those things, and then this reduces the impact of that. And number two, developers are unclear as to what is and isn't available. And therefore, they believe that the web platform is less capable than it actually is. And that, again, reduces the impact that we have with our work. So we address that with two related approaches. Number one is getting better at landing features that developers need most. And number two is making availability across browsers clear to developers on an ongoing basis. So I'll talk a little bit about what we've done in those areas this year and some of the opportunities for next year. So many of you will already be familiar with the Interop initiative, which is now an annual initiative to align on features that we want to fix and things that we want to ship next year. Not at some point in the future, but in the next year. And the year isn't over yet, but we've been enormously successful in 2023. So I want to talk a little bit about that. When we started the year, our collective Interop score, that is the intersection of features and that work across browsers, or tests passing across all the browsers, if you will. We started the year at 58%, and we now are at 88%. So there were some very impactful areas that are now implemented across browsers consistently and interoperably. It was really fantastic, and there are some really interesting things in there. So the hash selector, for example, was one of the top developer requests last year. Now available in all browsers. But also container queries, and I already mentioned subgrid. They're all available across all the major browsers now. But it's not just about new features. So much of Flexbox had been having bugs and inconsistencies across browsers to the point where developers couldn't use those things. And we took on a lot of those things in Interop 22 and in Interop 23. And that's really what Interop is about. For things, the core of Interop, for the things that we do ship, that we ship them interoperably, that we ship them without major bugs that keep developers from using those things. And I'm very happy that we've actually seen already signs that developers don't consider flex bugs one of the major issues anymore. And so with so much accomplished, I can't wait for Interop 24. And speaking of which, the call for proposals just closed. We got 102 proposals. That's a new record. I think we had about 88 last year. Yeah, fantastic, really. So some of you will be asked to weigh in on these, to estimate them, to value them, to provide tests for them. And I hope you'll be generous with your time, because this is really the first time in 2 decades that we have the opportunity to land features on the platform, not just in a single browser, but on the platform itself. And as you can imagine, developers are really just thrilled about that. So I hope you'll be generous with your time for this one. Interop is very much focused on the middle of the life cycle, which is where we deliver things in a coherent manner, and making the web more interoperable and in the process more functional. However, to maximize the impact of Interop, we also need to do good research as input into what should be prioritized for Interop. And then we also need to get the word out to developers. We need to make it easy for them to tell what is and isn't available on the platform without them having to keep up with every release of every browser. So that's why we founded the WebDX community group last year. And we did that together with all major browser vendors also present in the Interop process. And the goal of the community group is twofold. On the one hand, it's to enable shared research on the pain points that developers face. And then it's about making it easier for developers to track the list of features that are widely available and those that are still under development. So let's start with research. Interop was founded on the results of the MDN Web DNA. We ran that survey in 2019 and 2020. But by now, those results are a little bit stale. So for this year, we've worked with Sasha Grive to expand and update the state of JavaScript, state of CSS surveys. And we launched a brand new survey, the state of HTML survey, which is actually closing this week. If you want to contribute to that, yeah, I think you still can. But I'm very happy to share that already we have had more than 20,000 participants for the state of HTML survey. It's really fantastic. It shows us that there is real demand for this, that developers want to tell us about those things. And just a few things that I want to highlight from that. In the state of HTML surveys, there is a lot of room for developers to give free-form responses. And there are 9 different areas, with forms and form handling being one of them. And that area, forms and form handling, got more free-form responses, I think about 10,000 or so, more of them than all the areas combined. That's a good signal. There is something that developers care about. And we've already funneled some of those findings, those preliminary findings, into Interop 24. And I'm hoping that we can use the full results for prioritization next year. So aside from those very action-oriented specific surveys, we've also run a shared developer satisfaction survey. So that's where the top developer pain points comes from. But it's also about developer sentiment with the web platform. And these surveys, they don't give us highly actionable feedback. They give us high-level feedback about where things are going. We're making sure that nothing falls between the cracks, that we know what the trend is in certain areas. And beyond this, we've also done short surveys. So this is courtesy of MDN. Working groups can just approach us if they want to ask a question or two. We can run that on MDN with very little time, on very short notice. So that leaves the last part, awareness and adoption. That's the go-to-market part. And it brings us to the question, what is the web platform? How can we tell developers that something has landed on the platform if there is no consistent understanding of what the platform is? So we don't do that. Instead, we look at defining what a feature is and what availability is. So what is a feature? That is a seemingly simple question. But when you think about it, it's surprisingly difficult to answer. Like CSS Grid. Technically, CSS Grid is just, it's the value of this display property. But of course, it's so much more. It's also template rows and columns and other things. And sometimes those sub-features cross technology boundaries, like with the dialog element. So you have HTML, CSS, and JS components here. The web is really a hierarchy of features, like smaller features making up larger features. But there is no place where you can go to look that up. And currently, you can go to MDN, and you can get very granular information about specific features. So MDN will tell you about the availability of Grid template, but it won't tell you what the availability is for CSS Grid as a whole. You can go to Can I Use for that, but then it won't tell you what actually makes up CSS Grid as a feature. So like, is subgrid a part of CSS Grid in this case? Well, no, but how would you know that? So that's why we've launched web features this year, where we map all 11,000 lower-level features of the web platform to the 1,000 or so higher-level features, and where we combine the high-level overview of caniuse.com with the granularity of MDN. Now, that only leaves one part, which is when a feature is actually landed on the platform. And that's what baseline is. So we've launched that this year, and it's a line in the sand to indicate which features are available across major browsers. We're still determining the exact definition of this on MDN, and sorry, with the WebDX community group. But the first major milestone is when the feature lands in the latest version of all major browsers. And then there's a time 2 to 3 years after that when a feature reaches about 95% of share. And that is what we will show on MDN and Can I Use. You can already see that on some pages on MDN. And it will be rolled out across all of the pages next year. And baseline really gives us a language to talk to developers about what is now here and what is coming up. So we can talk about baseline 23 at the end of this year. And then we can compare that to baseline 22. And we can look at which features have been landed on the platform within that year. That's a moment in time. And a moment for developers to pay attention once a year to be able to know what has landed instead of having to follow browsers all of the time. So I'm very excited for what we have done this year, but I'm even more excited for what this will enable for 2024 and beyond. So for one, we've established a cadence for the web platform. So we still don't have releases, and each browser is still free to land anything it wants at any time throughout the year. But what we now have is a cadence that is emerging. So we have the state of surveys that provide input, vendor-neutral input into what should be prioritized. Then we have interop, which gives us the ability and the tooling to coordinate our releases for the next year. And then we have baseline that developers can follow once a year instead of looking at feature releases every couple of weeks to tell what is available and what is not available. And that is a cadence for the web platform. So there's so much more, and I'm looking forward to talking to you all about that over the next couple of days.